Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be presenting my presentation on workers' rights, and I have a subtopic of unsafe working conditions and unlivable wages. Now, I'd like you to imagine going into work every day knowing that you could be seriously injured because your workplace isn't safe, or working long hours while earning so little that you struggle to provide for yourself or even your family. Now, unfortunately, this isn't something that most people imagine, and it's the reality for millions of people worldwide. Today, I'll be discussing workers' rights by focusing on the issue of unsafe working conditions and low pay. I'll explain why this is considered a social injustice, how governments and economic systems contribute to the platform, and how it connects to this course, Catholic social teachings, and also how the philosophers that were discussed in this course, like Immanuel Kant and Emmanuel Levinas, would respond to this issue. First off, what are workers' rights? Workers' rights are the legal and moral protections that every single employee deserves. These rights include receiving fair wages, working in a safe environment, reasonable working hours, freedom from discrimination, and the right to join labor unions. These exist because every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Work allows people to support themselves and their families so that everyone could have the opportunity to work in safe conditions without being exploited. Although many countries have laws protecting workers, these rights are still violated in many places around the world. Now, the specific issue that I'm focusing on is unsafe working conditions and low pay. That's the social injustice that is being done to millions of people worldwide. And many workers are required to work long hours in these dangerous environments while earning wages that are not enough to meet their basic needs. Some workplaces lack proper safety equipment, emergency exits, or even adequate training. This can drastically increase the risk of serious injuries or even death. Now, according to the International Labor Organization, millions of workers continue to experience unsafe working environments every year. And this just demonstrates that despite labor laws, worker exploitation remains a global issue. Now, even for people who aren't fully aware of these problems, they might ask why this is in fact a social injustice. Well, the issue is considered a social injustice because every human being deserves a chance to be treated fairly, especially in a workplace where that you get your livelihood and everything like that. When workers receive these low wages or are forced to work in unsafe conditions, hence not being treated fairly, they often remain trapped in poverty and a lot of them get injured. This can not only affect the worker, but oftentimes the families that they provide for. And if they can no longer provide for that family, then the family will suffer. So instead of respecting workers as people, some employers prioritize profits over their employees' well being. Now, this creates inequality and prevents many individuals from achieving a better quality of life. So now let's connect what we've learned back to this course. The Catholic social teaching teaches that every single person is created in the image of God and therefore has inherent dignity. This means every worker deserves fair wages, safe working conditions, and respect when working. Now, another important principle is the option for the poor and vulnerable, which reminds us that society has a responsibility to protect those who are most at risk of being exploited. When workers are treated unfairly or placed in dangerous situations, these Catholic teachings are violated because people are not being treated with the dignity that they deserve. So, the biggest takeaway from this is that inequality is something that is not taught within the Catholic social teaching, and oftentimes inequality can lead to mistreatment, especially in workplaces where employers take advantage of those who they employ, hence their employees. So yeah, that's the Catholic social teaching connection that I made there. Or at least that's what I was able to take away from it. But aside from that, what exactly was the government contribution? Now, for the most part, it was simply weak labor laws and poor inspections and failure to enforce safety standards. Now, a huge example of this would be the Rana Plaza factory collapse in 2013. This actually happened when the Rana Plaza building in Bangladesh collapsed after workers were required to enter the building despite visible structural damage. Now, this number is insane, but more than 1,100 workers lost their lives and thousands more were injured, all because of carelessness from the government, as well as laws that weren't so enforced, or laws that were very weak. This tragedy showed devastating consequences of ignoring workplace safety. And even though these laws were in place and they existed, they were not enforced and were strengthened after this huge factory collapse. So, what else happened? Even though governments play an important role in protecting workers, when labor laws are weak or not properly enforced, employers may ignore safety regulations or pay workers unfairly without facing serious consequences. Some governments may lack the resources to inspect workplaces regularly, while others struggle with corruption or poor enforcement, meaning that they have the resources, but they're actively choosing not to do it, not to check out why this is happening. Now, by strengthening labor laws and ensuring businesses follow workplace safety standards, governments can significantly reduce worker exploitation. Now, next up is the socioeconomic contribution. Another major contributor is the economy. Many businesses compete by lowering production costs in order to offer products at lower prices. But unfortunately, one way some companies reduce costs is by paying workers less or investing less money in workplace safety. Consumers often enjoy lower prices, but many people don't know that these lower prices come at the expense of the safety of another human or even their livelihood. Now, this shows how economic pressures can sometimes encourage unfair treatment from employers to their employees or workers. Now, next up, we have the philosophers, and I'm going to start with Immanuel Kant, who believed that every person has inherent worth and should never be treated simply as a means to achieve someone else's goals. Now, applying this idea to workers' rights, Kant would argue that employers should never treat workers as tools for making money, but instead businesses have a moral duty to respect every worker as a human being with dignity, rights, and value. Providing safe working conditions and fair wages is one way of respecting that dignity. Next up, we have Emmanuel Levinas, which he believed that we have an ethical responsibility to care for other people, especially when they are vulnerable. We know that workers are suffering because of unsafe conditions or unfair wages. Levinas would argue that we have a responsibility to respond and defend them. Governments, businesses, consumers, and communities all have a role in protecting workers and improving their working conditions. Ignoring the suffering of others is not ethically acceptable because every person's well-being, it matters. So he believed that we all have an ethical responsibility to speak up for another person. That's to summarize what he's saying. Next up, we have some possible solutions. Now, although this problem is very serious, there are many ways it can be improved. Governments can strengthen labor laws and improve workplace inspections. Businesses can provide safer workplaces and pay fair wages. consumers can support companies that treat workers ethically and avoid businesses with poor labor practices. But when governments, businesses, and consumers all work together, then workers are much more likely to receive the fair treatment that they inherently deserve. Now, finally, I have my reflection. And overall, I feel like doing research on this topic has allowed for me to really understand how corrupt governments can be, how corrupt companies can be. And especially as someone who hasn't been too far in the workplace, it makes me more aware of these things. And to be it kind of acts as a warning to be more careful of applying to jobs and to doing proper research when applying to them. Like, know who you're applying to, know what you're getting into, all of that. That's my takeaway from this. But it also puts a different perspective on being a consumer as well. Seeing as I buy things, like I'm starting to think about what's the process of it getting to the grocery store or the dollar store before I buy it. Like, how did it get there? Whose hands did it go through before getting on the shelves? What conditions were they in? Were they treated fairly? And I'm all realizing this is all a result of actually doing research for this topic. Well, anyways, we're out of time. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation. That's it. Bye-bye.